Hi, Ray here. I'm glad you could join me for, well, I'm sure you've heard the news. Nikon has announced the release of Firmware 2.0 for the Z9 camera. Wow. I've only had my Z9 for a month, and I'm still, admittedly, getting my head around all of its functions, much more to learn. But I'm more than excited to check out some of the very welcome additions to this amazing camera's already fulsome capabilities. Mine shipped with the latest or last firmware 1.11, so it'll be a christening of sorts. I mean, going on what I've seen and heard, this is massive, like getting a new camera, the Z9 II. Now, by the time you see this, it'll be a couple of days since the announcement, and those who've had time to check out the pre-release beta version, people like Richie and fellow Canadian Gerald Undone, they've done a superb job of introducing all the shiny new stuff. Gerald, as usual, exploring the minutiae of the new video functions, including dynamic range. And it looks like the man down under, Matt Irwin, stayed up late to prepare his detailed look. Nice one, Matt. So it wouldn't make much sense to repeat what most others have already covered. This will be my thoughts as related to my use case. The big news is the addition, as we were promised at the launch of the Z9, of internal RAW video recording. The Z6s required a paid factory update to enable external ProRes RAW recording with something like the Atomos Ninja 5. And I bought a Ninja, but I haven't gotten around to sending one of my Z6s in to be converted. Do you believe in RAW? To date, I've been happy with the 10-bit ProRes recorded with the Ninja, and I've appreciated the Ninja's advanced exposure features as well, like false color and waveform monitor. And wouldn't you know it, Nikon has included a resizable waveform in this update. They're listening. I'm sure I wasn't the only one that put in a request for this feature. As for the actual video codecs, resolutions, and frame rates, we get the existing choices, including 8-bit and 10-bit H.265 and ProRes 422, and the addition of Nikon's own NRAW, which Nikon says is half the size of ProRes. This all comes via Nikon's collaboration with TicoRAW, Tico standing for Tiny Codec. Again, I won't go into all the individual specs, but specifically, here's something I wondered about in one of my Z9 pre-release videos. Do we get DCI, which is wider than ordinary UHD resolution? For instance, 8K UHD is the usual 7680 by 4320, while DCI is 8192 by 4320. So the answer is yes. You'll be able to shoot up to 8.3K at 60 frames per second. This gives more choice in cropping. The caveat here for me and other Mac Final Cut users is that there is at this point no support from Apple for NRAW. In fact, I think there's only two options for editing Nikon's RAW codec, the main one being DaVinci Resolve. I've never used Resolve, and I'm not sure I have it in me to learn another NLE app at this point. I'm still a beginner with Final Cut after 3 years of use. It appears that even using Resolve in Rosetta, something I know nothing about, is not possible at this point. So I guess, unless Apple decides to include support, I'm going to be using ProRes RAW HQ, which is restricted to 4.1K 60p, which isn't half bad. For someone like myself with no hands-on experience with RAW recording, it's going to be interesting. Will I join the Church of RAW? One thing Gerald mentioned, and it's something I've pondered. Besides the extra work in grading, you also have to deal with the loss of lens corrections. RAW is kind of a fundamentalist codec. It promises ultimate freedom through abstinence and the study of mysterious texts. Speaking of faith, as you may know, I'm waiting arrival on an M1 chipped Mac Studio, bought in large part to accommodate editing the kind of big files this Z9 is capable of producing, that my Intel Mac chokes on. So that's a bit disappointing for us Mac users. I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for Apple to accommodate NRAW. We just got firmware 10.6.2 for Final Cut Pro, and there were no big changes in that regard. Well, as Richie, who's also a Final Cut user, said in reply to my comment on this issue, it's not as though we'll often find ourselves recording in 8K RAW. I don't know about you, but I'm already facing a big investment in expanded storage for the 4K video I shoot now. I mean, according to Richie's tests, a 512 gigabyte CF Express card will hold just 14 minutes of 8.3K NRAW video. That's at 50 frames per second. I'd more likely use 24 frames a second, so that would get me what? 20 minutes? I don't know. But you get the picture. Mega storage demands. Okay, so these are a few of my other favorite anticipated things. There will now be a red box around the LCD when recording video, much more noticeable than the present little recording icon. Hopefully it'll eliminate my habit of turning recording off instead of on, and vice versa. We'll now have a video function screen, accessed it looks like via the I menu. That's fabulous. Fine ISO control, now in 1/6 increments instead of 1/3. That'll be great for tweaking exposure more granularly. And yes, that could have an effect on grain. And I recall some Nikon hater haranguing me about the fact that the Z cameras couldn't shoot beyond the frame rate. Shutter speed is usually set to twice the frame rate, to refer to the 180-degree rule. As an example, if you're shooting 30 frames per second and rather than 1/60th of a second, you want to slow the shutter down to half a second to, say, introduce motion blur, you couldn't do that, unlike some other cameras on the market, and you can't. On the Z6, for example, that's recording this. So again, Nikon has been listening to feedback and has responded accordingly. I'll certainly be making use of that. We'll get fast access to focus speed adjustment. Some of you may be familiar with my video tutorial on this function using the Z6. From what I can understand from the announcement, there'll be a way to access this on the fly during recording. As far as photo capture, there are also some handy changes. They're evidently improvements to low light shooting. Sports, wildlife shooters, and photojournalists will be able to capture images before and after actual shutter release. A sort of a time travel for photographers. You can set the delay, or is it anticipation? It only works for JPEGs though. You'll be able to adjust the wide area focusing box to better suit the subject. They've added a timer in bulb mode, and I'll definitely use that. Even though I was looking forward to pulling out my old MC20 remote, fits the Z9's 10-pin input. It's about 25 years old, and it's been in retirement since I stopped using the F90X film camera. Well, I haven't completely abandoned it, see here. The EVF gets some love. There'll be blend mode for blending multiple photos in camera. You'll be able to program multiple buttons for different focus points. Again, I imagine sports and wildlife photographers will be pleased with that innovation. So, as Mr. Undone said, this is a GOAT level upgrade, and I had to look that up in the Urban Dictionary. Greatest of all time, for you other old goats. And who could disagree? Nikon has really laid down the gauntlet, or goatlet. No kidding. Okay, I'm done with the bad puns for now. What do you think? Which of the Z9's new features would be most useful to you? Or what would you like to see improved or added in future updates? Because I think there's more to come. Oh, and last but not least, Nikon is also updating the Z6 II and Z7 II firmware 1.40 to improve autofocus performance. And if you need more awesomeness, the MCN10 remote grip is new with more functions than my old MC20. And there's a Nikon 660 gigabyte CF Express Type B memory card. I'll talk more about 2.0 when I've actually used some of the new features. I guess I'll have the chance, like everyone else, in 4 or 5 days. Then, if the weird weather eases off, I might get out on location more. In the meantime, take care of yourselves, cheers, and we'll see you later.